The topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the host and their guests, and not those of W4CS Radio, its employees, or affiliates. W4CS makes no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for listening to the Cancer Support Network on W4CS.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Survive and Live Well, tips to treat and beat cancer. My goal is to empower you with information to help you regain control of your health. Sit back and listen, or join the chat room. Send in your questions. Remember to visit my website, www.elynjacobs.wordpress.com, for more details about my guests and their contact information. So I'm sitting here once again with Dr. James Belanger, a naturopathic doctor practicing in the Boston area. In 1990, he was diagnosed with cancer and now is cancer-free because of the combined use of conventional and alternative medicine. He pursued a career in natural medicine because he wanted to offer people a more holistic approach to health care and was discouraged with many limitations of conventional Western medicine. He and his wife, Karen B. Braga, also an ND, are co-founders of the Lexington Natural Health Center. Jim, it is so great to have you here back on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Elyn.
Well, it's great. So, Jim, there's so much known, yet so much confusion about diet and its role in cancer, and also about the research that's involved in trials. So can you give us a brief summary of the research on diet and cancer?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're exactly right. There's a lot of confusion out there. And so I really try to read the published clinical research as much as I can find on the diet. There's certainly a lot of opinions on the internet, and some might be good, some might not be founded in any of the research. So just so listeners know, that's where I go first. There's a website called PubMed, which a lot of people are probably familiar with, pubmed.gov, where all the published peer-reviewed medical research is from, things on chemo to radiation to diet. And there are studies on diet. I would really like to see a lot more, but what I'm going to talk to you about today are the studies that have been done, mostly in animals. There are a few human studies done, but the animal studies have been very encouraging, where they're changing calories in the animals or reducing carbohydrates or types of fats like omega-3s, or just simply adding a particular food to the animal's diet and keeping a control group where they don't add the food, like adding cabbage family vegetables or soy or berries or something, and seeing tumors shrink or not grow as fast. And what's interesting about some of these studies is, in the animal studies at least, and some of the human studies, they've taken the tumors out and they look at genes and pathways in the cancer that influence blood vessels and proliferation, growth of the cancer, and they found down regulations of a lot of these genetic pathways. And what's sad is they're spending lots and lots of money now on creating these targeted drugs that affect certain cancer pathways. But there's so many pathways that you inhibit one and cancer upregulates and does something else. There are dietary things that so far the animal and there are actually a few human studies on this, have found that they inhibit blood vessels, inhibit some of these pathways, and they certainly don't create a lot of the side effects of some of the targeted drugs, and they're cheap too. And I just really wish that there'd be more research. As a doctor, I got patients coming in all the time that really don't want to do chemotherapy, radiation, take some of these targeted drugs that are available, like Avastin or something, mm-hmm. and I have to still recommend those things because the studies that are done on diet are just they're not the phase 3 where they're comparing them to the drugs. So I can't say that it's a replacement, but it's sure looking very promising, and I wish there would be more research so patients, don't necessarily getting bullied into chemo by family members and doctors, that they feel that the diet is a fully researched option. I mean, I support people no matter what they choose, but they, if they want to do, natural things all alone, that certainly could help, but the research needs to be done.
Right. I think the more research, you're absolutely right, needs to be done, but I guess many of us could go on the extrapolation theory of, okay, if it looks like a cat and sounds like a cat, it's a cat. Yeah. So even if you can't prove to me that it's a cat, I think I'll go with cat and bypass some of the toxic therapies. So I think a lot of us are sort of getting there, but unfortunately the mainstream doctors are really not saying other than, yeah, eat what you want, or sure, the vegetables will probably be some good idea, but they're not really explaining to patients like you say, how they can affect the pathways and the proliferation and all kinds of things that are really important that people need to know, that exactly what food can do. And
I was told, that diet had nothing, to do with the cancer. When I had cancer, I mean, that was, 21 years ago now. But still, I have doctors tell patients that, diet doesn't matter. You can eat ice cream, that kind of stuff.
Anything to keep that weight on while I pump in those toxins.
Yeah, and you're going to learn here today that high calorie is not a good idea.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah. So can we talk a little bit more about, in depth about calorie restriction?
Yeah, let's start with that, So that was like kind of the main thing. So I only know of one human study right now where they actually reduced calories and looked at recurrence rates. It was a 2011 study in women with early-stage breast cancer. But it was mainly they reduced the calories by reducing fat. So they reduced the fat from like an average of 51 grams down to 30 grams or less. And they noticed a 24% reduction in recurrence rates in these women with breast cancer. But there's certainly been a handful of animal studies, really positive animal studies, in breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer. And I do know that they are doing some clinical trials right now in breast and prostate to see if radiation will work better in patients that are restricting calories. But just to talk about the animal part, the animal studies where they kind of figure out what it might be doing, is like, for example, they just reduced the calories by about 30%, it seems, on average in these animal studies. That human study I mentioned, breast cancer, the calorie intake was only about 200 calories less than usual. It wasn't that much, but it was mostly fat. So we can't say that it was totally as what they were doing in these animal studies. So the animal studies, a 30% reduction in calories, and then they carried on for a month or so, and the tumors are like half the size on average compared to the group that didn't knock down the calories. So it didn't stop it completely, but it slowed it down, so it's half the size after about a month. And this is a handful of studies summarizing. But what's interesting, they're animal studies. They take the tumors out, fewer blood vessels in the tumors. The cancer cells had undergone some cell death. There was fewer metastases when they gave these really highly metastatic tumors to these animals. And then what's really, really interesting, and that's why there's probably a human trial going on right now, is the blood vessels changed in the tumors. Blood vessels in tumors are not the same as regular blood vessels. They're more immature. They are more leaky, so they're more porous. And what happens when blood vessels are more porous like that? Things leak out of the blood and deposit around the cancer. Compounds like something called fibrinogen and thrombin, they're compounds found in our blood that can initiate clotting. But they're in the blood, and they don't create a clot in the blood. But when they leak out of a blood vessel and deposit around something, they form this stuff called fibrin. And they're finding that cancer can be more resistant to chemotherapy and to radiation when there's like this deposit of fibrin all around the tumors. They call it the stroma. And the more leaky the blood vessels are, the more this fibrinogen and thrombin come out and deposit around. And so when they found that actually when they took the tumors out, they didn't have as much of this stroma around the cancer. And what's encouraging about that is that helps chemo, for example, get delivered to the cancer better. So caloric restriction, restricting calories, might help improve chemo delivery if somebody was doing that. And then radiation works by mixing with oxygen. And if there's not good blood flow to a cancer because of all this stroma stuff, this fibrin around it, the blood vessels collapse easier, the oxygen levels decrease in tumors, and radiation doesn't work as well. So there is an oncologist right now doing a clinical trial and seeing if caloric restriction makes radiation work better. Mm-hmm. But in and of itself, it might help even without the chemo and the radiation.
Right. Yeah, I think it sounds very interesting, and actually they're using some of that with the ketogenic diet, which we'll talk about a little bit in a minute. But before we leave this area, I'd also love to talk about, in addition to lowering calories, can you talk a little about reducing animal protein? Because a lot of us think that we really have to have that, and it's the mainstay of many of our diets. So we can talk.
Yeah, that's it. So we're going to each part, and it's unfortunately I haven't seen a study where they're doing all the things I'm going to talk about together. Then you could really maybe make some headway. These caloric restriction, they're just, giving them, standard mouse chow, and they're just reducing the calories and not giving them any real phytonutrients or anything like that with it. So, but in just that alone, there was some improvement. And then some other studies, they just look at protein. And there are a couple animal studies where they reduce protein to say, a human equivalent of about 30 grams a day of protein. And this was some lung and some lymphoma studies in animals, and the survival rate doubled by just that one change in lung and lymphoma given to animal studies. And then, but they didn't specify animal versus vegetarian proteins. There is a difference. For one, an animal protein is usually richer. So like 3 ounces of, meat or chicken is like 30 grams of protein, whereas a whole cup of lentils or something is like 15 grams or something like that. It's not as much as rich, most of the vegetarian proteins. So you can eat a lot more of them and still and be under 30 grams, whereas it doesn't take much animal protein. You're easily up to like 30 grams worth.
Right, and most of us are eating significantly more than that, 60 to 100.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
3 ounces, that's nothing but a big, 18-ounce big steak or something like that.
Or even 3 ounces 3 times a day. I mean,
yes, it's really not that much. But it can be done if you fill up on a lot of veggies, and then you have some beans scattered. I mean, a whole cup of beans is, like I said, it's still like 15 grams, and that's filling. You have a little bit here, a little bit there in your salads, nuts, seeds. Nuts don't have that much protein. 5 grams in a handful of nuts or something. It's really not that much. But there is a difference in the amino acids. Proteins contain building blocks called amino acids. And there's a particular amino acid called methionine that is found in animal protein. And there's not as much methionine found in beans and soy and nuts and vegetarian-based proteins. And there's research showing that you restrict methionine from animals' diets, like they've done studies on that, and it slows the proliferation of the cancer. The cancer likes to use methionine to help it grow and spread. And so that might be a reason why, vegan type of diets can slow down cancer, because they're not providing as much methionine in the vegetarian proteins. There's another reason too. They found that lowering animal protein increases the natural killer T cells, these cells that help fight cancer. There's some research on that in animals. But I do know of one study, like, Dean Ornish, Dr. Dean Ornish has been studied a lot on vegan diets and vegetarian diets, and he kind of moved from the heart disease realm to studying prostate cancer, where he did put some men that had low-risk prostate cancer. They didn't have any, surgeries or radiation. He just followed them for 3 months or so, vegan diet, and he biopsied their prostates afterwards and found that some of those growth pathways were downregulated. So here's a diet affecting certain pathways in the cancer, making them not form that proliferation. It might be because of the methionine. Methionine intake seems to increase proliferation of cancer cells. Now, this doesn't mean I'm anti-animal protein. I still eat it, but make it a condiment more than highlighting everything, So like a soup or something, you put a lot of beans and all kinds of veggies in there, and just a little bit of some animal protein.
Right, or a big plate of vegetables and just a little bit of fish or a little bit of steak
exactly.
or whatever it is,
Yeah, not saying, like 3 ounces of fish is 30 grams of protein or something. So, and you do that and you eat all beans and veggies and all kinds of stuff, and it's filling, and then you're at lower calorie because you're not eating as much too, and that might help on that. There is a particular fat, though, in animal protein, as long as it's from, like, if the meat is grass-fed or the dairy is from grass-fed, there is this fatty acid called CLA that is formed in animals when they're eating primarily grass and given things like fish oil and vegetable oils, that the rumen in their body produce this CLA, which has this anti-cancer properties. And there has been a few animal studies where they put animals on a high CLA containing, dairy, like a butter that has a lot of CLA, and they didn't develop cancer as much. I haven't really seen anything where it shrinks existing cancer in food, that is. So there is if you're going to eat animal foods, buy the grass-fed, 100% meats, and the eggs from pasture-raised chickens and things like that. What might be best, and then don't. And another thing about while we're on the subject, don't cook them on your grill, and don't fry them up in the pan and broil them. There are these compounds. This is really interesting. That if you cook animal food at high temperatures, like on the gas grill, there's these compounds that increase in the meats on the animal protein called AGEs, advanced glycation end products, or AGEs for short. And they found there are receptors on cancer cells for AGEs. They call them RAGE, receptors for AGEs. And when AGEs bind to cancer cells that contain these receptors, it stimulates growth, basically. AGEs are not found in any real vegan, raw food, vegetarian options. They're found in roasted nuts or something like that. But if you eat raw nuts, they wouldn't be found. So heating, a lot of people are raw food vegan, and I do somewhere towards that does look what the research is showing. Because when you cook something that contains fats and proteins and stuff, that these AGEs form, and especially in red meats, but it's found in chicken too, and bacon, pork is like one of the highest. So all that stuff, and that might be a reason too, maybe for increased cancer. We're just ingesting these things all the time. You put heat up the olive oil in the pan, throw the meat in there, you're browning it on each side, and they're finding carcinogenic compounds in those things. But when you don't eat a lot of cooked, highly cooked animal foods like that, and more of those raw food vegan choices, you're not ingesting hardly any of these AGEs.
Yeah, well, it sounds like double trouble, because if you're not eating grass-fed meat and you're using a hormone-injected steak from your supermarket and then you're grilling it, sounds like a definite recipe for disaster to me.
Yes. So yeah, I'm not against it, but I really like this book. If your listeners haven't heard it, World's Healthiest Foods, and there's a website, whfoods.org, where he's not like 100% raw food vegan. He does still talk about animal foods, but he talks about the best ways to cook things, low temperature, like poaching, low temperature sautéing, using broth, vegetable broth, chicken broth to cook something in, steaming, those things rather than the grilling, and cites all the research and stuff like that. But that is the best way. So, like I mentioned, you put the meat in your soup or something, and instead of frying it up in the pan, browning it, and then adding your vegetables, you're creating more AGEs when you do that. So it
takes a little bit of the fun out of the food, but it'll make us live a little longer. It does, definitely.
I actually followed a raw food diet for several summers. I didn't do it all year round, but several summers, and I still head towards that. But one time, one summer, just all I did was that. And it's really good. You can make some really good, tasty foods. It's different, than you're used to, your model of browning the meats and that kind of stuff. But you can, with the right marinades and mixtures of herbs and all that stuff, you can really make some good, tasty food. It's just a little different way of thinking and cooking. So.
Right. And if you absolutely have to grill that steak on that Father's Day weekend, I would suggest maybe to everybody marinate it in a little rosemary, right, definitely marinate it in some of those things that can really help cut down on those AGEs.
AGEs, yeah, any moisture, because if it's browning, the moisture wicks away some of that. Yeah, so that's great. Yeah.
So just because I know that every once in a while a person's got to have what a person.
Oh yeah, I eat them every once in a while. It's a cumulative thing for sure.
Right, that's right. So, what's your take on lowering carbohydrates to treat cancer? Do you believe that people should have minimal carbohydrates, such as in that we mentioned before, that ketogenic diet, or do you think they should just be avoiding the high glycemic foods?
I'm really actually moving more towards avoiding the high glycemic foods and less towards the ketogenic diet. Now, this is a more recent change of mine. I have recommended for years the ketogenic diet, mostly to patients with brain tumors, metastatic or primary brain tumors. Haven't really found too many people very compliant with it. It's a very difficult diet. But just recently I have read 3 or 4 studies by a group at the Thomas Jefferson University that makes me really concerned about the ketogenic diet, which I won't get into. But for those that don't know what the ketogenic diet is, it's a very low-carb, high-fat diet, very low carb, maybe less than 20 grams of carbs a day. And what ketogenic means is when you eat high-fat, the fats get broken down into these compounds called ketones. And the thought is that cancer, this is what I learned, cancer cannot utilize those ketones. And then it lowers glucose levels in your blood and insulin. And cancer does like glucose. It contains glucose receptors. When they do a PET scan on you, they're giving you a radioactive form of glucose. And if the cancer cells or the cells around the cancer have glucose receptors, that will go right in there and light up compared to a normal cell. I mean, normal cells use glucose, but we're talking more in the cancer cells or the surrounding cells around the cancer, the stroma that I mentioned, and it lights up. So, yeah, there are all kinds of papers showing that if you have a high blood glucose, and I'm talking like over 87 milligrams per deciliter, not 100 or 99, you'll see normal ranges of blood glucose, 80 to 99. You have, over 87, worse prognosis with breast, prostate, lung, lymphoma, all that. So part of this ketogenic diet or a low carbohydrate diet main thing is to reduce blood glucose so there's not as much of that compound, that growth factor for the cancer. And then it lowers insulin, and there's receptors on cancer for insulin and insulin-like growth factor, which can inhibit cell death. And so, and there's a book that's been released, Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. It goes in all the, biochemistry of that. And there's certainly animal studies done on ketogenic diets showing that they can slow the growth of tumors, kind of like and even calorically restricted ketogenic diets, slowing the growth of tumors.
Right, Thomas Seyfried?
Yes.
Thomas Seyfried, yeah.
Yep. And, but there's very few human studies on any of this. There's a couple case reports published that are in his book or in the, a couple of kids with brain tumors and stuff like that. And, it seems from reading those case reports, it might have helped, but, it wasn't a cure-all or anything like that. But it might be useful. But so it looked really, really good. But a lot of these animal studies, they're not carrying them on for very long, 30 days, 60 days, stuff like that. What happens after that? There's some researchers, and you can go under PubMed and Thomas Jefferson University, and there's a whole bunch of researchers that are saying that ketones can fuel growth of cancer and cause metastasis. And, I don't want to worry anybody about they've been on a ketogenic diet. It seems like something switches after a while. So what they found is if they expose cancer cells to ketones for a period of time, that genetic changes happen in the cancer cells, which revert them back into a more embryonic form. And that embryonic form is more invasive. So, I was all gung-ho about ketogenic diets, and then I read these studies saying that it promotes it, and I was trying to think, what's the difference? It must be that you're on the ketogenic diet for a while, and then these genetic changes happen in the cancer cells that change them. Because there's research showing by the same group that that stroma, those cells around the cancer, that stuff that's deposits around the cancer, ketones can be produced by those stromal cells and use it to, in essence, help feed the cancer. So it's not true from the recent studies that ketones don't promote the growth of cancer. They don't seem to, maybe initially, but over time. So it's a concern. So I'm moving back to more of the low glycemic, because the low glycemic diet is, avoiding, high. For those who don't know what that means, it means you don't want to eat, carbohydrates that have no fiber in them, where like a white flour and white rice and fruit juices and things. So foods that aren't going to spike your blood sugar. And so, basically a lot of green vegetables and the beans and the nuts and the seeds and those types of things. A little small amount of animal protein, but really reducing a lot of the starchy stuff, from the potatoes to the corn to drinking fruit juices to the pastas, the rice, that stuff. So you cut way down on that. And then that can have a profound effect on lowering your blood glucose to under that 87. And it lowers insulin levels, fasting insulin. It lowers insulin growth factors, which seem to be the main effects of what you need to happen in your body to inhibit cancer. And there is at least one human study that I know of where they did put people on a low glycemic diet, people with stage 3 colon cancer, and they had lower recurrence rates and improved survival. So there's a human study on that, plus a whole bunch of animal studies. And you don't form ketones when you don't restrict the carbs that much, and so we're concerned. Same thing with caloric restriction. If you really restrict your calories way down and you are starting to lose too much weight, you're going to form a lot of ketones in your body. So, I'm not saying a person should restrict calories if they're already thin for their height and weight, but somebody that is overweight, that needs to lose some pounds, they're obviously eating too many calories, and they reduce the calories, get down to a more comfortable weight. If you're somebody with stage 4 cancer and you have no appetite, that might not, you're restricting calories anyway, but caloric restriction seems to be best for somebody, healthy person with, high rate of a reoccurrence, or somebody with stage 4, but they're still really healthy, and they can tackle that kind of a change. And they're a little overweight, and they could use some lowering of the calories.
Right. And I think those lower carbohydrate diets are really, in general, healthy, and it's much more user-friendly than trying to figure out the whole ketogenic diet. Just trying to get people, as you say, to comply with it is really hard. So something to consider there.
And I'm not convinced, like I said, it's better than a low glycemic diet, and might not be as good. And the thing is, there are some high carby or foods that would, they're not high glycemic, but they do have carbs and would interfere with the ketogenic, like berries and even tomato pastes and beans, and there are some grains like black rice, buckwheat, that have anti-cancer properties, and you really have to limit those. You don't have to avoid berries, but you really have to reduce them down a lot of times on it. And a lot of berries could be really good. So I'll talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll get to that. So let's move on here a little bit and talk. We're so many people, as we talk about these things about fats and things that we're supposed to avoid. So many of us are told, keep your weight down, avoid that fat, eat a low fat diet. So let's talk about fats, what kind of fats we should be using, and the best fats to consume when one has cancer.
So I'm sure everybody's heard this, but I'll say it again. It's those omega-3 fatty acids. You really want to increase your consumption of those and decrease your consumption of omega-6. So omega-3 fatty acids are found in the fatty fish, the wild salmon and the sardines and the mackerels and the herrings, but herrings is kind of hard to market. So, and then it's found in, you don't have to eat animal protein. You eat walnuts, flax, chia seeds, hemp seeds have some. So those omega-3s. And then you want to reduce omega-6 fatty acids. Now, omega-6 fatty acids are found in a lot of vegetable oils, like soy, like salad dressings with soybean oil, or corn oil-based things, or grain-fed dairy, so cows eating grains, their milk is going to have more omega-6 fat in it, or meats from grain-fed animals. But if you basically eat for your fat sources, you have some flax seeds, some walnuts, chia, you're eating some fish, and then you're eating beans and whole grains and
some avocados,
vegetables, avocado. Well, then avocados have another type of fat, which is another beneficial fat called omega-9, and there is some research on omega-9 also, but more I'd say on omega-3. But those are the two main ones: is omega-3 fatty acids, which are the walnuts, the fish, the flax, the chia, the hemp, and omega-9, which is olives, avocado, and other nuts like cashews and almonds and stuff. But the one in terms of cancer studies, I've seen more on olives and avocados than olives and avocados than almonds and cashew. But why omega-3? What does omega-3 do? Well, it's some really interesting studies. They take cancer cells, for example, and they change some of the genes to cause the cancer membranes to produce omega-3 fatty acids. So fat goes into the cell membranes of the cancer. And they found in these studies when the fatty acids in the cell membranes of the cancer change to more omega-3 and less of the omega-6, the cancer cells can't spread and migrate, proliferate, grow and metastasize as much as if they didn't have as many omega-3s. I know that was an extra particular study where they changed the genes, but if you really cut down on all those omega-6 sources, so you really reduce your intake of grain-fed meats and grain-fed dairy products and vegetable oils they're not all vegetable oils, but mainly like your corn oil and your soybean oil, and a lot of foods that are made with those things. So you wake up in the morning and you have a bagel with cream cheese. You're not getting hardly any omega-3s there. You get an omega-6, and then you have your piece of ham and cheese on your sandwich. That's all a lot of omega-6 again. But if you start changing your cell membranes over to omega-3 by cutting out those foods and upping the walnuts and the fatty fish and the flax, then over time, if you had cancer, the cancer cell membranes start to change to be having more of the omega-3 in them. And according to these studies, it might inhibit their ability to migrate. Because there's certainly research showing that, a high fish oil diet, for example, in animals inhibits their growth and reduces their risk for spreading. So, but I can talk about specific ones. There's some really interesting studies coming on walnuts, particularly. Now, walnuts are not super high in omega-3, but they're the only nut that has omega-3. Almonds don't have omega-3s. Cashews, Brazil nuts, they don't have omega-3s. The walnuts do, about 20% of their total fat. But they're more omega-6 than 3. But they do have 3. But it
gives you that good balance. You still have to have that nice ratio, so it's good.
Exactly. Then, like I mentioned, grain-fed meats don't have any omega-3. But 2 ounces equivalent of walnuts would be for people, but they gave them to animals. Estrogen-negative breast cancer, which is not the good one to have, the colon cancer, prostate cancer, just carried it on for a month or a couple months. The cancer didn't grow as much. It still grew, but like 1/3 to 1/4 the size than the group that didn't get that. Simple thing, just adding some walnuts to their diet, kept everything the same, and it grew, to about 1/4, 1/3 the size. And it might be because of the omega-3s. It might be some other things in the walnuts. But they took the tumors out and they had fewer blood vessels. And then there's a whole bunch of studies on flaxseed, human studies, showing lower mortality in women with breast cancer. There's animal studies in melanoma and colon cancer showing that it reduces the risk of metastasis. And melanoma is a big one for metastasis. And
that's what drives me crazy when so many doctors tell people, "Oh, don't eat flaxseed. My goodness, that'll raise your estrogen levels." And I want to shoot that doctor and say, "No, we need this flaxseed."
It's been studied, lower mortality in breast cancer patients, human studies, breast cancer patients, and they've done studies where they gave women, you probably saw them, about 3 heaping tablespoons of flaxseed, ground flaxseed, and then they did breast biopsies afterwards and noticed decrease in proliferation indexes and things, and it even decreases that HER2 thing. So some women have an overexpression of this growth factor receptor called HER2, and it makes the cancer more aggressive. And they do have a drug for that, a couple of drugs. Herceptin is one, and that's good. But they've done studies in animals showing that when they combine flax with that drug Herceptin, that the animals survived longer than Herceptin alone. And it didn't, so it doesn't interfere with Herceptin, and it actually decreases the expression of that growth factor. So you don't have to block it as much with the Herceptin. Again, more studies would be great. That would be a really nice human study to do. But really, nothing that I can see bad. The only bad thing that you hear about flax is, okay, yes, flax turns into something in the gut called enterolactone. And one researcher took enterolactone and in a test tube mixed it with estrogen-positive breast cancer, and it stimulated them. But that was in a test tube, and it had much higher levels of enterolactone than you could form in your gut when you ingest the flaxseed. So that was a test tube study, whereas animal studies have shown nothing but positive things, and those human studies that I've talked about. So, that's the only thing that kind of probably started off a cascade of people thinking that flax was bad. But you do need, the healthy bacteria in your gut to activate the flax. So it's important to either, have a food source of something that contains probiotics, like sauerkraut is something I like because it's got the cabbage in it, or take a probiotic pill, or the flax might not work as well in your body. Soy is the same thing.
That's good to know.
But you do need that. And then I mentioned chia seeds. Chia is kind of the, not as much research on chia as there are on flax and walnuts. And chia does have omega-3s, but it lacks these things called lignans that are in the flax that might make flax better, because flax is not just omega-3, it's omega-3 and contains these things called lignans, which have a lot of anti-cancer properties. But anyhow, chia seed has been studied in animals. It caused more cancer cell death in colon cancer, and when they took the tumors out, they found that they were full of T cells, T cells that would kill the cancer, good T cells. So, I say just have a variety of them,
I like them all in my cereal.
Seem good. Yeah, just, walnuts in your salad, flax in your smoothies or some, have some fish,
right.
Little few ounces of fish at night. Yeah, all that stuff. Yeah. And what's another interesting thing is, fasting there's this one study showing that it takes a while for those omega-3s to get in your cell membranes. It could take like 3 months, depending upon how restrictive you are. But if you want to get it into your body really quickly, you fast for 4 days. Day 1, day 5, day 9, day 13, where all you have is you could take some fish oil pill or something, and then just water or really low calorie foods, no fats besides the fish. And then by the end of the 14 days, you'll have a lot of omega-3s in your cell membranes. So that's a quick way to get it in. Is if you don't fast, then all these other fats that you might be eating might compete, and they won't get into your body as much. A lot of people take a fish oil pill and expect that that's going to really change all their ratios, and it all depends on what else you got in there competing with it. If you're eating a lot of those omega-6, the fish oil is kind of getting diluted out. So you really want to not only, if you do take a fish oil supplement, which I don't think you really have to, you want to reduce all the competing fats, all those omega-6 fats that might be in Yeah.
What I always like to tell people about eating fats is why I throw in the avocados. I like everyone to eat avocados because you feel full, and then you don't have to feel like you're not hungry. So you are reducing your calories just naturally, because when you take the fat out of everything, you're hungry. That doesn't.
And then you can't. I want to talk later that carotenoids, beta carotenes, alpha carotenes, lycopenes, all those things, you can't absorb them if you don't have any fat. So you have to have some fat if you're going to eat something that has those carotenoids, or you're not going to absorb them, and then you won't get the anti-cancer benefits. But avocados, I couldn't find that much on avocado in terms of cancer, but there are some test tube studies that say that it might inhibit cancer growth. So, and plus they're really high in magnesium, folic acid. They got those omega-9s. Olives, certainly a lot of research on olives having anti-cancer things in olive oil. And get the unfiltered extra virgin olive oil, because they'll have more of those polyphenols, they call them, that have the anti-cancer properties.
You know, Jim, we have somebody asking that she actually was starting to switch from olive oil to grapeseed, and she would like to know your opinion on that.
Well, most of the research I've seen is on, with cancer is on grapeseed extract, which contains these things called polyphenols. There's really not that much in the oil. I'm not familiar with really the research on the oil. I've certainly found research on olive and cancer. Mm-hmm. So I'd really have more. There's so many other fats that I've seen research on, like I mentioned, from the fats in chia. I really wouldn't cook with oil, period. I would add it later, because you oxidize, even if it's not smoking, you oxidize the fatty acids.
That's right.
So you want to cook, you put a little bit of vegetable broth in a stainless steel pan, heat it to low temperatures, saute your vegetables just a few minutes so they're still crunchy, and then add your olive oil, your flax oil, or something afterwards. It's more likely to preserve it. I really haven't seen much on grapeseed oil in cancer. Lots on grapeseed extract, though.
Right. Yes, that's a good one. But before we run out of time here, let's just get into soy a little bit. So what is your position on soy? It's a very controversial one, and I know we probably can't do it justice in a few minutes, but at least if you could throw something there.
I'm all for soy. I cannot find much negative studies on soy for cancer, even breast cancer. Now, there was some controversy again with animals, postmenopausal, animals with low estrogen levels and breast cancer. But animals metabolize the soy different than humans. There's a 2013 meta-analysis where they analyzed 5 different studies. One of them was in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Over 11,000 patients, estrogen negative, estrogen positive breast cancer, premenopausal, postmenopausal, non-Asian women from California, and lower risk of a reoccurrence with women with breast cancer, any type, and lower risk of dying from the cancer. And these are and these are not soy pills; these are soy foods.
But not genetically modified soy. We don't want any of that.
Yeah, definitely not genetically modified, organic. They didn't specify fermented, non-fermented, but fermented soy products like tempeh, miso are probably better. So I support it, and definitely with other cancers, I support it, because there's besides, soy might act more of as an estrogen receptor antagonist, because they've done studies in women where they check uterine linings, breast density, estrogen levels in the blood. They don't find that it affects any of that stuff. It doesn't increase the lining of the uterus and stuff like that. Soy pills might, if you start taking a lot. But like a serving, 3 or 4 ounces of some soy product, like tempeh or miso would be the best. A cup of miso soup provides maybe 30 or so milligrams of these things called isoflavones. Just that, not a ton and not a lot of pills. But some women are concerned that it interferes with tamoxifen. They've shown human studies it doesn't interfere. It doesn't seem to add any benefit, but it didn't interfere. But the women that are on aromatase inhibitors, Femara, Arimidex, Aromacin, it made it work better. Human study showing lower reoccurrence rates in women, not metastatic women, but early stage breast cancer patients on Arimidex, combining it with eating some soy food. It was a soy food, lower recurrence rates. And it's because soy might even act as an aromatase inhibitor itself. So maybe that's how it works, kind of doubles it. But even besides its effects on estrogen receptor and antagonist, it's been shown to decrease blood vessels, decrease things that lead to metastasis and invasiveness of the cancer, inflammation. It's been shown to make chemos work better. There's animal studies combining that soy isoflavone, the thing that's in soy, with cisplatin, Gemzar, radiation, showing that it can make them work better by having the chemo and the radiation promote cell death. So,
fantastic.
I'm all for it, but I would stick with more of the food, not some texturized soy protein or something like that. just something
Right.
like a bowl of miso
Simple.
soup and a few ounces of tempeh or something a day. Yeah.
Good thing I had that miso lentil soup for lunch yesterday. Phew.
Yeah. But
Okay.
to be look at everything and say this has lecithin, this I can't have any soy. I mean,
Right.
I really don't see any evidence on it. Initially there was with the animal studies and the test tube studies, but there's been many human studies since that have proven otherwise.
Okay, so we only have about 3 minutes left. So if we could perhaps name a few of your other favorite anti-cancer foods.
Okay, so just a few. So try to include these things. Cruciferous vegetables, especially Brussels sprouts, kale, collard greens, mustard greens, and green cauliflower when you can find it. There are compounds in cruciferous vegetables called glucosinolates, which are the highest in those foods that can inhibit, cancer progression. There have been studies done in prostate cancer, in particular human studies, but all kinds of animal studies. Try to eat them more raw. When you cook them, you destroy some of the glycosinolates, or steam them lightly. Try to eat them as fresh as possible. If they've been sitting around in your refrigerator a long time, those anti-cancer compounds reduce. But Brussels sprouts are the top for when you can get them for those glycosinolates. Broccoli is actually doesn't even compare to Brussels sprouts. And the older the broccoli is, the less there is. But you can still have broccoli. Carotenoid-containing foods that have those orange pigments, but they don't have to be orange. Spinach, dandelions have tons of, they call them carotenoids, like alpha-carotene, beta-carotene. But pumpkin is extremely high. So get, BPA-free canned pumpkin and mix it in things. It's a great thing. Lycopene-containing foods, especially, now cooked tomato products have more lycopene. Lycopene has a lot of anti-cancer. Organic, cooked tomato paste, tomato sauces, great thing. Seaweeds, everybody's into iodine now. Iodine has all kinds of anti-cancer properties they're finding. It doesn't just inhibit breast cancer, but lung, melanoma, prostate, pancreatic cancer. You don't get iodine from too many food sources except for sea vegetables, seaweeds, especially kelp. And there's research done on brown kelp in particular, showing it has a lot of anti-cancer properties. So get those sea vegetables, buy powdered kelp. They have it at health food stores, and sprinkle that on your food. Good teaspoon or so a day might be a good dose. Berries, all kinds of berries, especially the blueberries. If you can find black raspberries, there's a human study in colon cancer. Black raspberries inhibited proliferation pathways, and they have powdered black raspberry. But blueberries, strawberries, organic, great. Asparagus, it's something that's coming on the internet, but it is true. There's research showing that asparagus inhibits cancer. And don't chop off the bottom of the asparagus. That's where there's more anti-cancer compounds. It's a little tougher, but chew it.
Cook them in your soup maybe or something?
Yeah, put it in soup, yep. All kinds of allium vegetables, which means garlic, scallions. Scallions probably the top. But onions, get yellow onions over white onions. They have more anti-cancer compounds. Red onions are great. Shallots. Anything that has that blackish blue pigment, black beans, black rice. If you're going to eat a potato, eat those blue potatoes. There's something in there called anthocyanidins, which are found in blueberries, which have all kinds of anti-cancer properties. You eat those things, they're found in black beans, too. They're found in black rice. Anything that's got that bluish-black pigment in there is great. They're found in purple cauliflower, for example. Artichokes, really high antioxidants, a lot of anti-cancer properties in artichokes, and it can be actually the artichoke hearts sitting in the glass jars. Those are really good. Yeah.
All right. So we unfortunately... Good, perfect, because we are out of time. So, Dr. Belanger, thank you very much for sharing your expertise. I think we learned a ton today, and you really added a lot of clarity to that entire confusing issue of diet. So thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks.
I enjoyed it.
And this has been Survive and Live Well, Tips to Treat and Beat Cancer on Cancer Support Network, W4CS.com, where you can listen live Tuesdays at 1 p.m. If you missed any part of today's show, you can catch it on on my website, www.elynjacobs.wordpress.com. This is your host, Elyn Jacobs, one-on-one cancer coaching, empowering you to treat and beat cancer. See you next week.